Hey guys, Michael here. Welcome back to Gaming for Immersion. And one thing that I have avoided doing very much of on this channel is reacting to other videos, mainly because I don't want to be seen as trying to profit off of the work that other content creators do. And I know there's plenty of other people out there who are doing reaction videos, and I've always kind of wanted to do my own thing. However, having said that, when another YouTuber specifically requests for people to react to their videos, I do make the exception for those cases. And so I do want to begin this particular video with the actual tail end of the Terminator's video. Now, I have been binge watching the Terminator off and on here recently because he does a lot of really fantastic mod-related type video for the historical titles, kind of similar to what I've been doing for Warhammer, except he's obviously hundreds of times better than I am at it, certainly much more experienced at it. If you're unfamiliar with his channel and you like the historical title Total Wars, I highly recommend watching a number of his videos. And of course, the particular video that I'm going to be reacting to here, I will of course link in the description to this one, so please do check it out for yourself. I'm not going to play through the entire video, and he does make a lot of really good points in it, so I would encourage you to watch his video in its entirety, and also that way I don't have to feel bad for using his content on my channel. But anyway, like I said, let's go ahead and start with the beginning of his video, I'm sorry, the end of his video, and then I'm going to jump back to the beginning and give my thoughts. But the reason why I'm starting here is going to make sense here in a moment.
In fact, I want to end this video here with a call to all other Total War content creators. If you agree with me here, make your own videos talking about this, asking CA for a new, invigorating, innovative, major historical Total War, a new flagship for this side of the series. Let's start a domino effect of videos coming out from everyone, Jackie Fish, Legend, Lionheart, whoever, anyone and everyone, to ask CA for a proper major game.
Okay, so he probably didn't have me in mind when he said that, although he did say anyone and everyone. So obviously those others he mentioned are quite a bit larger than this particular channel, but you know, we're working on it. We're getting there. We're working our way up. So anyway, what this video is all about, you can kind of tell from his title here, Time for the Next Major Historical Total War. And it's obviously very similar to a topic I talked about a month or so ago, which was to repeat Legend of Total War's call for a Medieval 2 remaster, which I still think is a very good idea. That's not really the direction that the Terminator is going in this video. He would like to see basically a Medieval 3 or an Empire 2 or something along those lines. And as he said, if a content creator agrees with him, they should make their own video. Well, I do agree with him, although I would like to add a little bit of additional context to it, because I do really appreciate the way that Legend approached the idea of a Medieval 2 remaster, which is make it a business pitch, make CA see that there is potential in it, because I really think that that's the way to get through, not just to Creative Assembly, but really to any organization which is motivated by profit, which quite frankly is obviously most of them. Certainly any corporation, and certainly any game developer. So thinking about it like that, the point that I made in the Medieval 2 remaster video was I have some concerns about the viability of historical titles, and I thought that a Medieval 2 remaster would be a good way for CA to sort of test the market, so to speak, without committing all of the resources required to make an entirely new title. I still think that's a good idea. They clearly have done a lot more research. They've got numbers at their disposal that we do not have access to. And so presumably they already have some idea of whether or not a historical title could do well, and presumably, you know, what particular type of historical title would do the best. I personally think that a Medieval 3 is probably the best bang for their buck, possibly followed by something like a Rome 3, but I feel like probably Medieval is the is going to be the most popular genre, so to speak. I might be biased because I studied medieval history in college, so take everything I say there with a grain of salt. But in any case, my point is CA has their own background information. But as the Terminator mentions in this video, and I'm not going to jump around through all of it because that's going to make this a really time-consuming video. But as he points out, there is concern amongst us, the consumers, that CA may have drawn the wrong conclusions when it came to Total War Pharaoh. The problem is not that there's no appetite for a historical title. The problem is that the implementation of Pharaoh was really a bit of a what's the right word? I don't want to call it a disaster exactly, but there was a lot of stumbles along the way. It was very poorly executed. And so to draw the conclusion that there's no appetite for historical titles from the fact that that particular title didn't live up to expectations would probably be at the most generous, it would be misleading. It might be just a completely mistaken conclusion, if that is indeed the conclusion that they've made. I have no doubt, and I have said before, that I understand why Warhammer is considered a bit of a cash cow. I do want to play the beginning of this video because let's let the Terminator talk about why he thinks it's so important, and I'll come back to the point I want to make.
Over 28,000 players are playing historical Total War games every day. That's if you combine the 24-hour peak players across titles like Rome 2, Medieval 2, Empire, Napoleon, Shogun 2, and more. And compare that to Total War Warhammer 3, which despite being the flagship fantasy product, the flagship any product really with constant DLC support, this game peaks around 25,000 daily players. So that's right, the old titles, some of them nearly 2 decades old, combined have more daily players right now than Warhammer 3. That's not just impressive, that's a warning shot to...
Okay, I'm going to probably disagree with him a little bit that it's a warning shot, but I do think it's a really good point that he makes here. I do think I'm going to trust his numbers. I haven't double checked them, but I certainly don't think he would lie about that, and or make a mistake about it. It's not all that difficult to calculate all that. But in any case, let's presume that those numbers are true. I think that they are indeed really good information, that we can see that there is just as big of a historical title player base as there is a Warhammer player base in terms of concurrent players. I think it might be lacking just a little bit of context, because CA is obviously interested in how many concurrent players they have playing a game, but they're also interested in sales. And it's not exactly the same thing to talk about how many people are playing a game concurrently versus how many people purchase a game. And I don't want to suggest that I think CA wants to sell their game to a player who's only going to play it for a couple of weeks and then put it away and never play it again. However, from a financial standpoint, that is an important part of the calculation. So again, a little bit more information that we need to figure out, just what the profit margins are going to be for game development. We need to know a little bit more than just the number of concurrent players. So that's really the only point I want to make there. But I do think, again, it's a really good point that he made. And I think it's very promising because, like many other people, I play Warhammer, but I'm also quite interested in the historical titles. I would love to see another historical title come along that has sort of some of the advantages that Warhammer has. I've said before, I do worry a little bit that Total War has spoiled us all in terms of the historical titles, because there's a lot more mechanical diversity, thematic diversity, replayability, things like that in the Warhammer universe than what you have in any historical title. There's probably just no way around it when you look at the difference between playing as the Skaven versus playing as the Dwarves versus playing as the Beastmen versus playing as the Wood Elves. There is such a diversity in the way that those campaigns play and feel compared to the difference between playing as the Holy Roman Empire versus Denmark, which is probably, or let's say maybe Egypt in medieval. Those are about as far apart as you can get in that game, and yet they're going to feel very similar in a lot of different ways. Then when you move more to a game like Pharaoh, I think the differences are even less pronounced. So, you've got light cavalry, you got chariots, you got archers, you got melee infantry, and there's only so much you can do with those things. Whereas in a fantasy world, you've got dragons, you've got gyrocopters, you've got, single entity monsters, you've got magic, there's just a lot more depth there. Now, again, that depth doesn't appeal to everyone. And I would like to say, I agree with the point. I'm going to jump ahead here in his video. I think it's about 7:15, because he makes a really good point here that some of the historical titles actually had more depth in terms of their systems than what Warhammer does. And I miss that depth in some of their mechanics. So let's listen to that part.
Also, over the years, Total War has seen the rise and fall of numerous systems and mechanics, some of which were beloved by the community and worked so well in their games, yet quietly discarded in future titles. As the series evolved, many of these mechanics were stripped away in the name of accessibility or simplification, but what players, I think, want now, more than ever, isn't less depth, it's more. Take family trees and dynastic politics, for example. These were essential in Medieval 2 and Rome and Shogun 2. They gave weight to your decisions, letting you guide your lineage through generations, navigate internal power struggles, and manage ambitious nobles or generals.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I think you get the idea. 100% on board with him on this one. This is so true. There are really good mechanics that I miss so much that used to be available in the older titles, and I don't really understand why I do understand why they were taken out. Just like he said, it's for accessibility. As you want to maybe widen your audience, we're talking from CA's perspective here, as they want to appeal to a wider swath of gamers out there, they streamline certain systems in order to make it a little bit less complicated. The problem is, there's always trade-offs to decisions like this, right? So you streamline things, you make it simpler. Yeah, you're appealing to some new players, and at the same time, you're losing some of the older players. So it's a very difficult balancing act that I understand is tough for CA to find exactly what that right balance is. But I do agree with the Terminator. I think there is an appetite here for an awful lot of the gamers to see deeper, more complex systems. And I think you can see it in the popularity of some of the faction mechanics from recent DLCs in Warhammer. Probably the least popular legendary lords to play these days are the ones who had simpler mechanics that never got a rework. Whereas, you're talking about some of the things like the Chaos Dwarves were super popular when they came in. The Warriors of Chaos had some really interesting mechanics that were introduced and made them really popular, I think, until a lot of people realized how completely overpowered they are. But the point is that you can get away with making deeper, more interesting mechanics, and it's going to appeal to a lot of people and not really scare away that many people. So I feel like the balance would be better off if it went in the direction that the Terminator is suggesting here, in terms of bringing back or maybe refining some of the older mechanics that used to be in some of the older historical titles and have since been removed. Put them back in. We see the popularity of mods like the trying to remember now the name of the one that adds the population mechanics. Apologies to the mod author. I've even did a video on it. I always think of it as the DEI of Warhammer because it has that same similar type of a population mechanic in it. There's certainly an appetite for that kind of thing amongst the player base. So I'm totally on board with the idea of another major historical title, with the caveat that I think that there could be some value in them doing a remaster first, just to see what the appetite is without having to consume all of the resources. But like I said, there's just a little bit more context to it, because I'm going to go back to the way that Legend approached it with the remaster version. I think the Terminator hits the nail on the head here in terms of what players want, but what players want is not necessarily 100% aligned with what a game company wants. And so I do like the idea of trying to frame it as a business argument. Now, he does that a little bit. I don't want to suggest that he ignores that completely, because obviously the whole 28,000 historical title concurrent players versus the 25,000 for Warhammer, that is, framing it as a business argument. I just think there's probably a little bit more additional context that I would add to it. But yeah, sign me up for the idea of another major historical title. I like the idea of it being a new iteration of one of the already popular titles, like a Medieval 2, bump it up to Medieval 3, another Rome. I never played Empire. It's one of the few titles I never played just because I was living overseas and had no time for gaming at the time that it came out. Heard that it had a few bugs and things in it, and so I never really got around, never got motivated to try it out when I more recently had time to start playing again. But so I can't really speak to whether that one is really popular enough to truly warrant a sequel. But yeah, take one of the ones that looks like it did really, really well in the first iteration, update it, but do exactly what the Terminator is suggesting here in terms of bringing the engine up to modern times, refining some of the mechanics. There are things that Warhammer introduced that are good mechanics that could easily find their way into a historical title and should. And I love the idea of learning from Warhammer, but obviously there's a lot of things from the historical titles that got left out, and those should also be revisited and perhaps some of those put in instead of the changes that were made for Warhammer. So that's really my main point. He asked other content creators in the Total War space to add their voice to it. I do agree. I think it would be a great idea. I'm very hopeful that there is, with the whole hyenas disaster behind us, and presumably there is still a future for Total War. Obviously, we keep hearing about new titles that are coming out. I don't want to speculate too much on those. There are other people who have better knowledge than I do of what those titles are likely to be, but I'm pretty excited by some of the ones that I hear. But absolutely, I think there will always be a lot of us who are going to be interested in the historical titles as well. And there's even going to be a subset of people who are only interested in historical and not interested in fantasy or science fiction or what have you. So in any case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. But please do add your commentary to this video, or like I said, go back and watch the Terminator's video and add your commentary to his. It's good for my algorithm, so I very much encourage you to leave any comments here as well. But like I said, he's the one who did the hard work here, so I definitely want to give him credit for it. And we'll see if maybe some other content creators add their voices as well. I would love the idea of a bunch of us reaching a critical mass and it being enough to motivate CA. If they're not already motivated enough, which who knows, hopefully they are. All right, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thanks everybody so much for watching and listening. I will see you all in the next video.